I would like to first talk about the story of the chapter and then read a section of it that is the short section of it, so that I respect the time limit. My intention was, of course, there are works on supplication, on especially Collins' article, which is actually my starting point, and but it hasn't received, I think, enough attention, especially in our life. It's we have this formal communication with God, which is the Quran text, that there is, of course, the angels bring it to the prophet, and then the prophet teaches and preaches it. But this is within this communication, there is also a special kind of communication which takes place without any intermediaries, without anybody. It's a very intimate connection between God and his creatures, and this is what the Quran actually teaches. And this was my interest, that how Quran, okay, we read the books, and there are like in theological books that there are the description of supplication, but I wanted to find out how is this supplication described and explained in the Quran, because in the Quran we have these beautiful supplications that God teaches to his creatures, and he's kind of very keen, anxious to teach. This is because it's a very, very rewarding process, and it's a way of making things right and making it easy on us, because the life can be very difficult. There are spiritual problems that we come across, and there are, of course, material problems that we come across, difficulties that we are facing day to day, and supplication is a way of overcoming those difficulties. And if we believe in the connection between the spiritual realm and the material realm, and the connection between the two, and the power of human soul, I think there is a very important ground for this supplication, the importance of supplication. But what we understand from the existing literature is it's not been emphasized enough. And also there are like artificial boundaries created between this supplication, this very important tool, and the individuals, like normal people. For example, looking from the philosophical perspective, we have this, certain levels that one needs to reach to supplicate, and those supplications to be granted. And on the other hand, some very extreme Sufi interpretations that we have. For example, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who lived in the 2nd century, he famously said, "It is about 50 years that I have not supplicated nor wished anyone should pray for me, because supplication is considered is lack of submission to God's will. Because in supplication you try to change the course of events and make the problem go away, whether it's spiritual problem or material problem." So I think in that sense, I wanted to revisit this supplication and try to make it more simpler for believers, normal believers, not just like an academic research. This is, I think, it's not a purely academic. It's more making it available, the supplication, bringing supplication back to people. So I like to now read briefly. I have, I think, 15 minutes left. According to Islamic teachings, aside from the formal method of divine communication, every creature of God has an informal form of free access to God without the medium of prophets. This secondary form of divine communication is supplication. According to Muslim theology, supplication is a free form of connection to God. It is fundamentally different from other Islamic rituals and worships, which are strictly regulated, commanded, and conditioned. There may be certain presettings for a successful supplication, such as a sincere and humble heart, state of being in absolute dependence on God, which could enhance the effect of supplication. Further, it is believed that supplication is a universal phenomenon. So long as individuals believe in a creator, there is no requirement of being a Muslim to make a petition to God, as it is an open invitation for everyone. Quote, "Invoke me and I'll respond to you." Quran 40 and 60, Surah 40 and verse 60. "What would my Lord care for you if not for your supplication?" Quran 25:77. "Is he not best who responds to the desperate, one when he calls upon him and he removes evil?" Quran 27:62. A more striking example of this to this effect is, "And when they board a ship, they supplicate Allah, sincere to him in religion, but when he delivers them to the land, at once they associate others with him." Quran 29:65. The verse implies that let alone the supplication of faint-hearted believers, even the sincere supplication of polytheists could be accepted, because it is a simple and intimate process of communication between the creator and created without any formalities. Moreover, the Quranic verse indicates that God takes this intimate connection seriously and promises to respond to the legitimate supplications, of course, within the boundaries of divine wisdom. The boundaries seems to have been established in the following verse. "And remember that Abraham was tried by his Lord with specific commands, which he fulfilled. He said, 'I will make thee an imam to the nations.' He pleaded, 'and also imams from my offsprings.' God answered, 'But my promise is not within reach of evildoers.'" The verse is one of the most striking examples that teach believers the power and efficacy of intimate communication with God in Muslim scriptures. Yet, it also shows the limits of supplication by giving an example of when and how a supplication may be declined, even if it comes from one of his most trusted agents. God may grant spiritual and material qualities to individuals for their spiritual achievement, or simply because of their willingness to ask God, thus acknowledging his power, generosity, and the feebleness of human existence. Yet, God does not upset the delicate balance built upon the preservation of free will, so long as individuals make a conscious decision to follow the path of ungodliness. It is contrary to God's wisdom to turn their heart to faith, let alone make them leaders or role models for the preservation of faith. Therefore, while God elevates the status of Abraham to the highest level of human existence, he kindly declines his request to extend his position to the leadership, to his offspring, at least not all of them. In this way, this particular verse establishes the boundaries of the influence of supplication over the material and spiritual realm of human existence. As I will not note below, Quran portrays God as extremely generous in granting supplicants' petition that may easily change the course of the system of causality or other physical rules that dominate human life in this world. Despite its informal nature, reading through the Quran, one can quickly notice that God provides templates for successful supplication in his formal communications due to its great power over physical and spiritual realms. The relevant verses of the Quran demonstrate God's eagerness to educate people for petitioning the reasonable requests both related to physical and spiritual realms. This is most often done through quoting supplications of prophets in the Quran. These supplications are mentioned in the Quran to teach people what and how to ask from the Creator. Most significantly, but less often, God directly interferes in the process of supplication and teaches his creation how and what to ask from him directly. So this was the introduction part of the chapter, and now I'm going to read from the section, the supplication in the Quran. In addition to the verses mentioned above, there are many verses encourages people to invoke God for their deeds. And when my servants ask you, O Muhammad, about me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of supplicant when he calls upon me. Quran 2, 186. Invoke your Lord humbly and in private. Quran 7:55. Invoke him in fear and hope. Quran 7:56. These are the promising verses from God to believers. God asks people to invoke him when people are in need. He then reassures people that he is near and will respond to the invocations, especially the one which comes from humble, fearful, distressed, and hopeful heart.
Further, 5 minutes, Seyfeddin, sorry to interrupt. 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Further, supplications which are made in private seem to be more effective, as they are likely to be more intimate and sincere. It appears that the recipe for successful supplication is simple. First, faith in a mighty God is a precondition, as the invokers should acknowledge from the bottom of their heart that there is an almighty creator out there who listens to his people and can bestow favors upon them when they call upon him. It only takes to achieve the state of humble, fearful, desperate, and hopeful heart, which are the key ingredients to connect to God and activate his individual mercy and blessing. The emphasis of Quran 286 on the proximity of God is noteworthy. I'm just skipping through. Perhaps one of the most compelling evidence for the success of invocation combined with strong emotion is mentioned in chapter Al-Ankabut. And when they board a ship, they supplicate Allah, sincere to him in religion, but when he delivers them to the land, at once they associate others with him. Aside from providing a compelling example of human ungratefulness towards divine blessings, what makes this verse more remarkable is that it explicitly refers to the polytheists who, in the moment of distress, turn to God alone and invoke him for their safety. God then responds to this invocation by delivering them to land safely, yet they then go back to their state of polytheism. An all-knowing God should have been aware of their transient embracing of the faith. Nevertheless, God does not rebuff their request. According to the verse, a momentary focused emotion of desperation overcomes the disbelief in a soul, and in this sincerity of heart immediately triggers God's response to invocation. It is almost a mechanical process operating in the spiritual realm. In this sense, God, in accepting supplications, does not discriminate based on religious conviction or the level of faith accumulated in the heart. His main criterion is the sincerity of heart, whether it is transient or long-lasting. Once this condition is fulfilled, God seems to respond supplications habitually. The Quran encourages people to supplication through mentioning the invocation of previous prophets who needed support, protection, reassurance, and victory in their struggle against their enemies. The outcome of these supplications was mentioned in the Quran to increase believers' conviction that their supplication would be answered. For example, when Adam acknowledges his error in his sincere and remorseless supplication, God responds to him positively and forgives him and his wife. And there are some other examples of prophets, but I just want to finish the talk with the last example. And this example is, I think, very important. However, one of the most striking invocations mentioned in the Quran is mentioned not from a prophet, but from the mother of Mary, who implores God for her daughter's protection. Mention, O Muhammad, when the wife of Imran said, "My Lord, indeed I have pledged to you what is in my womb, consecrated for your service. So accept this from me. Indeed, you are the hearing and the knowing." But when she delivered her, she said, "My Lord, I have delivered a female," and Allah was most knowing of what she delivered. And the male is not like the female, and I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge for her in you and for her descendants from Satan, expelled from the mercy of Allah. So her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and caused her to grow in a good manner and put her in the care of Zechariah. Every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with her provision. He said, "O Mary, from where is this coming to you?" She said, "It is from Allah. Indeed, Allah provides for whom He wills without account." One of the strongest human emotions is the love of mother for her child. So she utilizes this strong emotion for a very righteous cause. What makes these verses noteworthy is that God responds to the wife of Imran's supplication and accepts little Mary as a gift of her dedication to God. He then protects her from the internal and external influences of Satan and makes her raise in the best manner under the supervision of Prophet Zechariah. It seems the supplication of her mother did not only help her to be raised in the best manner away from the many dangers of life, but also provided her with worldly provisions on a daily basis. Because the verse states, every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with her provisions. It is not clear if the provisions appeared as a result of her mother's supplication or Mary also made supplications for provisions, but it is certain that the daily provision was a result of supplication. Despite their highly elevated status, neither Mary nor her mother were prophets. And yet they could communicate with God through invocation, and God would listen to their invocations. The Quran also includes God's response to the invocations of the other significant figures, such as magicians of Pharaoh and the seven sleepers, hence provide the believers with the wisdom of great many benefits of sincere and hopeful supplication. Okay, that's it. I think this is what I was trying to do in my chapter, that supplication is not just exclusive to certain individuals, or it comes with, great many purifications, but it's completely related to the nearness of God and strong human emotions and pure human emotions, I think. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, so now we've got about just over 10 minutes for our Q&A. I'm going to go in order that I see the hands according to the participants list. So I do apologize if I pick you and you know. But yeah, so Mashid, I've got your hand up. Is that
okay? Thank you very much for a really interesting talk, Seyfeddin. I just want to ask, if supplication is totally without intermediary, does this not contradict God's transcendence?
In what sense?
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
because God is transcendent and we're contingent, so we can't really directly.
Well,
yeah. So how can this happen? Without totally and complete intermediary. So how does God communicate? He said there was no intermediary with God to
Well,
supplicate.
this
Isn't there some
idea
kind of intermediary? Sorry.
well, this idea of transcendence, I think that my reading is that philosophers are making it a little bit difficult. Like we make it ourselves difficult, this connection, because this is what I understand from the verses of the Quran, that it's, God says, I'm near to you. I'm near, and ask from me. So instead of going and coming up with these very complex theological arguments and making it like this connection more complicated, it doesn't help anyone. And my argument is that this is how it is. It's very simple. As long as we believe that there is a creator, even, the example I gave in the Quran is that this polytheists, and in a moment of desperation, they realize that they are so feeble. And this is what we feel in our lives, that there are moments in our lives we are very feeble, and we know that there is something out there. We don't know, we don't reach this conclusion from this reading this complex theological works and theological arguments. We just know it in our heart, because we are inbuilt with this faith, I think, and then we are here to understand and expand our knowledge of God. So we don't need in that kind of, and in the moment of desperation, this intense feeling, we come to this realization that there is a God, and we ask for help, and he grants it. It's just automatically. And the only condition here is not this transcendence, all this theological, having that knowledge of those, or understanding of those complex theological concepts. Is just to understand the God, like there is one God and creator, and he's there to help us. And this operates, I think, it's not a random process as well. That's what I'm trying to argue, that it is almost a mechanical process, because this is a system that operates. I mean, in this world, we have this material world, but there's also a spiritual realm, and they have it. This spiritual realm it has its own rules, and I think in the Quran, that's what God teaches to people, that these rules, that how to unlock, how to make use of these rules, because so long as we have a good intention, we have, we fulfill these conditions, we can communicate with God, and he responds to, and he answers to those requests, legitimate ones. Of course, there's I mentioned also the issue of freedom, that he wouldn't force upon, like Ibrahim, Prophet Ibrahim asks to make his descendants also imams, but there is, of course, individual choices are also important. And within that framework, I think he justifies, he grants this application. So I don't know if I answered your question, but my point is that simple terms, I think we shouldn't make too much theology. We shouldn't focus too much on theology. Some things are, I think, simpler than that and easily understandable. We don't need you don't need even words. It's just simple human emotions, and would resolve some of the problems.
Yeah, I mean, I get your point that we are innately connected to our creator.
Yes.
But what I'm trying to say is we can't be physically connected, because as dependent creatures. So there's always been some kind of intermediary to, because there's two aspects of Allah. Allah is closer to us than our jugular vein. On the other hand, Allah is transcendent. We can never know his essence. So, we need to kind of be in the middle. I think where you are, probably innately we're close to Allah, but we can never know the essence of Allah. So we could somehow, it's not contradictory. It's going to, it's almost going to Seth's point.
Okay, now I understand your question better. But here we are not trying to understand God. We are just asking something. We are in distress. But that connection that connection actually, it's actually connecting as well individuals to God. And, you know, sometimes we don't need to know everything about God, because then he's not God. If you know anything, you know, if you know God truly, then he's not God, because then, as you said, it's just defeats the whole theology, that because he's not infinite anymore, that within your grasp of your mind. So of course there's not that kind of understanding, and I think even the prophets and the greatest prophets have that kind of power to understand God, fully comprehend God, which means that you are making him setting boundaries for God. But what I'm trying to say here is that this connection. In order to have that connection, I don't think we need to understand God fully, or we just it's also a form of communication.
Sorry, Seyfeddin.
Yes.
Can I quickly move in? Colin here. I think Colin had his hand up.
Yes. I've been. Yeah,
I've move in
I've
with your
seen.
question, and then we can get things.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Saif. It's very interesting. I'm just wondering whether you came across the idea as I did when I was researching dua, that dua is as much about calling on Allah without actually asking for anything, calling on Allah as an affirmation of his divine names and attributes, because that's what we do when we make dua. We direct it to a name or an attribute or a series of names and attributes. And in a sense, it's a way of affirming the creator-created relationship, rather than just being, a petition. There's petitionary prayer, intercessionary prayer, prayers asking for things in particular. But dua, I think in its purest form, and I wondered whether you'd come across this, is basically a kind of reaffirmation of the names and attributes as we perceive them. And it's a kind of entreaty that we may be given more understanding. As you said, we can't know God completely, but calling on God's wisdom, for example, we can ask him to manifest his wisdom in ways that are fathomable to us and make sense to us. So it's a kind of affirmation, really, of the attributes and the names, as much as being an entreaty for something, a petition for something, and that may not even enter the equation.
I read a very interesting paper, Colin. I'm now started a course. I'm doing a course here on early Gospels, and with because there's a very good expert here at University of Toronto, John Kloppenberg. He's a very, very big guy. And last week we had it's somehow related to your point. We had a very interesting reading. It's called Magic or Miracle, some second century instances. And after reading this article, he kept asking us, what is the difference between miracle and magic? Because, in the for people who lived in the second century Middle East, because magic, that they had the magic, that it was a very superstitious world, and there were magicians, healers, and they manipulated the words, asking God for favors, like, they had their own, whatever you say, their lives, and they are manipulating, gods for their understanding, so that they can get individual benefits from those for the polytheists who lived in the second century Middle East or Anatolia. And then Jesus came, and he said he's using again these words, like it's a form of supplication. He performed the miracles, but of course miracles were coming from God, and he was getting individual benefits from that, not for himself but for individuals, and for others that who are sick, and he healed people, raised the dead. So, and then there's of course lots of discussion, and then it goes on. But this was a question that stuck to me, that what is the difference? Because in prayer, if we just reduce it to asking favors from God, yeah, it is kind of same thing, isn't it? We are using some knowledge, a form of knowledge, to manipulate, or not to manipulate. Manipulate is a vicious word, but asking God for favors. And it's so I think we need to think about here more. And I think your point is important, because there is this acknowledgement of God, that that this getting connected to God. And
I can just if I can just quickly do we have time for another question?
So
we have some questions in the chat
If I
box.
just can conclude this point here, I think that
just go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Please.
So just important is, I think, what you said is also very important. It should be taken into consideration. But there is also like, okay, this is at higher level, we can engage in this kind of theological discussions and then acknowledge it. But what I was trying to also, I thought this chapter is also in the sense that we are talking about getting to the roots, like individuals uneducated or lay people wouldn't know about these kind of theological concepts and all these attachment. So I think this is what the Quran's language is as well, that Quran doesn't talk to the philosophers or theologians. He's talking to people, like people who can just get something out of it, who can learn from it. So in that sense, I think I limited myself to people, the normal people level. And because there are some writings on higher levels, Sufis, philosophers. So in that sense, I limited myself to that, just Quran's level. That the level, of course, not the level that he speaks. Quran speaks to people, lay people.
I think that's very helpful. It fits in very well with the whole pastoral wing of our project.
Yes, that's one.
So thank you for doing that.
Brilliant.
We are a few minutes ahead of ourselves, so it's okay to, if it's okay with you, Saf, I'll read some of the comments.
Yes, I was going to say, let's do that before I bring
okay, because we were 5 minutes ahead of ourselves.
Brilliant.
So what I'll do, I'll read the comments, and among them are maybe some questions. So then feel free to answer anything that you want to ask, so because you might not have time to go over all of them. So Dr. Kara, your presentation is very helpful for clinical pastoral educators that pedagogically includes supplication as a closing pastoral counseling. Your categorization of supplications in the Quran has a very practical utility to caregivers in training. Thank you. So it's just a comment. In Tafrika, Ghazali frames this as this is granted as both a gift and a gratuity. And we have another comment here. Allah Ta'ala is near, close, and intimate, and there is no veil between us and him. Tears are the gateway to God's mercy, always, as Torah says, there's no door which can't be opened by tears. And another comment, magic is unreal. Miracles are real, but miracles happen because Allah can change order of cause and effect. Prayers are a kind of divine miracle. And what do you say about the prophetic case of Prophet Ayub? What do you say about his practice of what appears to be a preference to gratitude of blessing in the midst of suffering? Where is patience and supplication? So that's a question. You may want to answer that.
I think that's a comment.
Is that a comment? Okay. Is there a question mark at the end of it?
Yeah,
okay.
It is, but I think he's also, he's answering, kind of self-answering to it.
Okay. Miracles are based on supernatural connection and not natural ones, in my view. Okay. It seems to me that this understanding of supplication does look to theology in the very practical sense. It looks to the immediacy of human emotion and experience and how that opens up connection with the Creator. It rests upon a needs-based theology whereupon supplication, sorry, I'll just scroll down. Supplication becomes the medium through which the reality of one's needs are acknowledged and expressed. Thank you, Dr. Kara, for these insights. So they're all comments.
It's my pleasure. I mean, I learned also, it's different perspectives as well. Thank you very much.
I
think there are two questions if we have time.
I think it was Farah and then Yasmin, was it?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think this is going to be very in line with Aisha Noor's comment, in the sense that, and sort of synthesizes Dr. Collin and Dr. Mashid's comment, in the sense that the intercessor between the transcendence, the transcendence of God and sort of the reality of the human being is the needs with which man is created. And so those are also an innate connection, in the sense that their needs are created within us, and those become the means by which one can communicate with the creator of those needs. And the other point that sort of came in mind was perhaps like your emphasis on the feebleness of the polytheists, and later in this chapter, Maryam, about her shaking the palm tree, speaks to the notion of acknowledging one's needs. And it is through that acknowledgement that becomes the intercessing power for acceptance of supplication. So in one way, Dr. Collins' comment of like prayer being an affirmation is true in the sense that prayer is essentially affirmation of one's needs and one's createdness, or I really found it sort of a synthesis in some of these comments, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Farah. This is also very insightful, your comment.
Yasmin? And then I think we'll probably move to wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your really interesting presentation, Seyfeddin. I just wanted to add something. I'm not a theologian, so I've got a more anthropological background, and I wanted to ask a question concerning the word magic that you just mentioned, that you went to these classes and the person was asking you about what's the difference between magic and miracle, and and from an anthropological perspective, it's a very problematic word, because especially in the anthropology of religion, because back in the 19th century when Christianity was still very, very strong, miracle was referred to those acts which were considered true religion, so they were considered Christianity. So like, I don't know, Jesus curing the leper and all of that sort of thing. And magic was referred to those things which were not true religion, so they weren't Christianity. So when they went out into deepest, darkest Africa and studied all those different religions, and that was magic, because behind it was a falsehood. So I was wondering, how do you understand that? Do you see that difference? How does that and how do you think it translates into Islamic ideas of miracle?
I think from the religious perspective, it's very easy to explain. Okay, magic is just it's vicious in its essence. It's just based on manipulation of gods, and which makes it actually gods are not able to understand human intentions. On the other hand, from the religious perspective, it's actually, there's a spiritual world, and in that spiritual world there is a system, and prayer, supplication, or any other relevant concepts are just way of operating within that spiritual realm. And this is a knowledge, a type of knowledge. It's like the knowledge of it's a science or medicine, in the sense that the God is can grant this kind of knowledge to people. So it's not the same thing. But in that sense, we were talking about how Matthew, actually we were talking about the Gospels, that how Matthew edited his gospel, because he wanted to dissociate Christianity from this miracle stories. He heavily edited these miracle stories because it looked like a magic, and he wanted to dissociate Christianity with paganism. So because it didn't seem any difference to normal people. So it was actually a way of early Christian theologians or scholars to find themselves new identity. So, but of course, as you said, later on, it became an anthropology. In the later centuries, it turned into an anthropological issues. So, but from the Islamic point of view, I think once we accept that there is a spiritual realm, and this spiritual realm, it has its own way of working, and this spiritual knowledge, supplication, is the just knowledge of how this world operates, is an acknowledgement of how this world is operate. I think it makes a lot of sense, and the difference becomes clear. It's not that you are trying to manipulate gods, but just God is one God, one mighty God is teaching you, giving you knowledge and wisdom to how to operate within a spiritual realm.